all things both great and small. For my own part, I go about loving." "Yes, but men," Ann Veronica, plunging. "Don't you want the love of men?" For some seconds they remained silent, both shocked by this question. Miss Miniver looked over her glasses at her friend almost balefully. "No," she said at last, with something in her voice that reminded Ann Veronica of a sprung tennis racket. "I've been through all that," she went on, after a pause. She spoke slowly. "I have never yet met a man whose intellect I could respect." Ann Veronica looked at her thoughtfully for a moment and decided to persist on principle. "But if you had?" she said. "I can't imagine it," said Miss Miniver. "And think," her voice sank, "of the horrible coarseness." "What coarseness?" said Ann Veronica. "My dear Vee!" Her voice became very low. "Don't you know?" "Oh, I know. Well." Her face was an unaccustomed pink. Ann Veronica ignored her friend's confusion. "Don't we all rather humbug about the coarseness? All we women, I mean," said she. She decided to go on after a momentary halt. "We pretend bodies are ugly. Really they are the most beautiful things in the world. We pretend we never think of everything that makes us what we are." "No!" cried Miss Miniver almost vehemently. "You are wrong. I did not think you thought such things. Bodies! Bodies! Horrible things! We are souls. Love lives on a higher plane. We are not animals. If ever I did meet a man I could love, I should love him—" Her voice dropped again. "Platonically." She made her glasses glint. "Absolutely platonically," she said. "Soul to soul." She turned her face to the fire, gripped her hands upon her elbows, and drew her thin shoulders together in a shrug. "Ugh!" she said. Ann Veronica watched her and wondered about her. "We do not want the men," said Miss Miniver. "We do not want them with their sneers and loud laughter. Empty, silly, coarse brutes. Brutes! They are the brutes still with us. Science some day may teach us a way to do without them. It is only the women matter. It is not every sort of creature needs these males. Some have no males." "There's green fly," admitted Ann Veronica, "and even then—" The conversation hung for a thoughtful moment. Ann Veronica readjusted her chin on her hand. "I wonder which of us is right," she said. "I haven't a scrap of this sort of aversion." "Tolstoy is so good about this," said Miss Miniver, regardless of her friend's attitude. "He sees through it all, the higher life and the lower. He sees men all defiled by coarse thoughts, coarse ways of living cruelties, simply because they are hardened by bestiality and poisoned by the juices of meat slain in anger and fermented drinks. Fancy! Drinks that have been swarmed in by thousands and thousands of horrible little bacteria." "It's yeast," said Ann Veronica. "A vegetable." "It's all the same," said Miss Miniver. "And then they are swollen up and inflamed and drunken with matter. They are blinded to all fine and subtle things. They look at life with bloodshot eyes and dilated nostrils. They are arbitrary and unjust and dogmatic and brutish and lustful." "But do you really think men's minds are altered by the food they eat?" "I know it," said Miss Miniver. "Expert credo. When I am leading a true life, a pure and simple life, free of all stimulants and excitements, I think, oh, with pellucid clearness. But if I so much as take a mouthful of meat, or anything, the mirror is all blurred." Part 6. Then arising she knew not how, like a new-born appetite, came a craving in Ann Veronica for the sight and sound of beauty. It was as if her aesthetic sense had become inflamed. Her mind turned and accused itself of having been cold and hard. She began to look for beauty and discover it in unexpected aspects and places. Hitherto she had seen it chiefly in pictures and other works of art, incidentally, and as a thing taken out of life. Now the sense of beauty was spreading to a multitude of hitherto unsuspected aspects of the world about her. The thought of beauty became an obsession. It interwove with her biological work. She found herself asking more and more curiously, "Why, on the principle of the survival of the fittest, have I any sense of beauty at all?" That enabled her to go on thinking about beauty when it seemed to her right that she should be thinking about biology. She was very greatly exercised by the two systems of values, the two series of explanations that her comparative anatomy on the one hand and her sense of beauty on the other set going in her thoughts. She could not make up her mind which was the finer, more elemental thing which gave its values to the other. Was it that the struggle of things to survive produced as a sort of necessary by-product these intense preferences and appreciations, or was it that some mystical outer thing, some great force, drove life beautyward, even in spite of expediency, regardless of survival value and all the manifest discretions of life? She went to Capes with that riddle and put it to him very carefully and clearly, and he talked well. He always talked at some length when she took a difficulty to him, and sent her to a various literature upon the markings of butterflies, the incomprehensible elaboration and splendor of birds of paradise and hummingbirds' plumes, the patterning of tigers and a leopard's spots. He was interesting and inconclusive, and the original papers to which he referred her discursive were at best only suggestive. Afterward, one afternoon, he hovered about her, and came and sat beside her, and talked of beauty and the riddle of beauty for some time. He displayed a quite unprofessional vein of mysticism in the matter. He contrasted with Russell, whose intellectual methods were, so to speak, sceptically dogmatic. Their talk drifted to the beauty of music, and they took that up again at tea-time. But as the students sat about Miss Garvice's teapot and drank tea or smoked cigarettes, the talk got away from Capes. The Scotchman informed Ann Veronica that your view of beauty necessarily depended on your metaphysical premises, and the young man with the Russell-like hair became anxious to distinguish himself by telling the Japanese student that Western art was symmetrical and Eastern art asymmetrical, and that among the higher organisms the tendency was toward an external symmetry veiling an internal want of balance. Ann Veronica decided she would have to go on with Capes another day, and looking up, discovered him sitting on a stool with his hands in his pocket and his head a little on one side, regarding her with a thoughtful expression. She met his eye for a moment in curious surprise. He turned his eyes and stared at Miss Garvice like one who wakes from a reverie, and then got up and strolled down the laboratory toward his refuge, the preparation room. Part 7. Then one day a little thing happened that clothed itself in significance. She had been working upon a ribbon of microtome sections of the developing salamander, and he came to see what she had made of them. She stood up, and he sat down at the microscope, and for a time he was busy scrutinizing one section after another. She looked down at him and saw that the sunlight was gleaming from his cheeks, and that all over his cheeks was a fine golden down of delicate hairs. And at the sight something leapt within her. Something changed for her. She became aware of his presence as she had never been aware of any human being in her life before. She became aware of the modelling of his ear, of the muscles of his neck, and the textures of the hair that came off his brow, the soft, minute curve of eyelid that she could just see beyond his brow. She perceived all these familiar objects as though they were acutely beautiful things. They were, she realized, acutely beautiful things. Her sense followed the shoulders under his coat, down to where his flexible, sensitive-looking hand rested lightly upon the table. She felt him as something solid and strong and trustworthy beyond measure. The perception of him flooded her being. He got up. "Here's something rather good," he said, and with a start and an effort she took his place at the microscope, while he stood beside her and almost leaning over her. She found she was trembling at his nearness and full of a thrilling dread that he might touch her. She pulled herself together and put her eye to the eyepiece. "You see the pointer?" he asked. "I see the pointer," she said. "It's like this," he said, and dragged a stool beside her and sat down with his elbow 4 inches from hers and made a sketch. Then he got up and left her. She had a feeling at his departure as of an immense cavity, of something enormously gone. She could not tell whether it was infinite regret or infinite relief. But now Ann Veronica knew what was the matter with her. Part 9. The realization that she was in love flooded Ann Veronica's mind and altered the quality of all its topics.